Hi everyone, I'm Myrna from Clearwater Aikikai, and today I will be talking with Hilary Sensei from the University of Victoria Aikikai. Hilary has been the chief instructor at UVic since 1987 and has a wealth of experience teaching children, beginners, young adults, and classes for women.
I started Aikido by coming from judo. I did judo in university, but I was not a particularly competitive person and didn't really want to continue in that thing. But it was actually somebody I played in an orchestra with, and he had done karate, and then he was on sabbatical, and he met up with Chiba Sensei and became an Aikidoist. And he told me, he said, "I think you would like Aikido." And when I left university, I went to Halifax. And lo and behold, there was a sign saying Aikido at the Y. And so I joined up. And 2 months later, there was a seminar, and it was Kahara Sensei, Ishiyama Sensei, and Cecil. And they all came down, and I had my first seminar. And it was just amazing. And it was a small group, but it was a very friendly, welcoming group. And we were part of a little community that whole summer. And so when I came out here, in 77, I found Aikido, which was at the time, there was Key Style. And but were having a seminar that fall, that December. And it was Kahara Sensei had just moved at the same time. And he recognized me from the seminar, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And that was the beginning of our training together.
Oh, that's
And
great.
it was great. Yeah.
So that was kind of a bit of serendipity then that
Mm-hmm.
that you were able, often when people make a move like that across the country, we can't necessarily continue Aikido. So it's great that you were able to do that.
Well, actually, UVic Aikikai, I think, has been going since 1975. But I don't know who was originally there, but when I came to go over there, it was we were connected to Victoria Aikikai. It was essentially, and still is, a satellite dojo. And senior students would be dispatched for a year or two. And in fact, I was sent over there in 87 to help Ralph Copperson, who was the senior instructor for those at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for 2 years. And then after 2 years, he stopped teaching there, and I continued. And at that point is when we had some other senior students coming. And so, in fact, Ben Peacock was my first assistant instructor. He was EQ at the time, and I was Shodan. And we trained together, so probably 1989 to 94. And so we both did our Udansha test together. I did my Nidan the same when he did his Shodan, and another guy did his Sandan. And we all practiced with Kahara Sensei. It was yeah, normally people were just there for a while, but somehow I never left. But there was always a second instructor. And so usually it was as students came and went, any senior student from anywhere else was always the second instructor.
Right.
And Ben was there for 4 or 5 years. And actually, Mike Smorhay was up there, not as a student, but as a second instructor as well for a number of years. And Ralph came back for a year, and I had another Jason Verbitsky was another student, and he was a Naba Sensei student. And so he came and trained for a number of years. Perry Pluis has also been my assistant, and now our other recent Udansha, Ken Ono, who did his Shodan with us 4 or 5 years ago, is the assistant instructor. So it was a way to try and have somebody young, because when I first started, I wasn't a senior citizen, but so you still, if you want to attract students, they don't really want to go and see what their grandma's doing. And first it was, I was a young mother, and then you'd see kids, and then they'd say you're older, and then you suddenly realize that, yeah, it's the grandchildren that are now going to university. And so it was important always to have an experience of somebody who could relate to them
Right.
in person.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, of course, when we started in 89 and in the early 90s, it was the heyday of Steven Seagal.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of exposure that way. We used to go to all the movies when they came out, and there'd be a dozen of us going. And but we also we did a lot of demonstrations at the beginning of each term. And there was always a retreat out at Cowichan Lake, which is a university property. And it was basically, it's a weapons weekend, and you run around the forest, and we go in the lake, and we have masogi, and that was the experience of students. And in the first early days, of course, long before cell phones, when you went to a retreat, you really were on retreat, because there was no contact, and we were just outside, and we did our early morning meditation, and then followed by masogi, and then we'd have weapons practice. There was always sleeping practice and fun practice, and everybody took instruments, and we took musical instruments, and we've kept that up until, well, even last year, just before the pandemic. We did a shortened one at Shawnigan Lake, and we stayed in the dojo, and there was 10, 12 of us, and walked down to the lake in the morning. That was always, every term, that's always been a big highlight of the terms things. We always had we started with, in the second week, there was always a potluck for everybody to start. And usually what it is these days is more noodle night after one night a week, and people just wander up. And so that's basically the feel of students who come in, and to try and have them have a sense of belonging to the group.
Yeah. That sense of belonging, I think, is really important, especially for university aged students. Like in Japan, we have like spring and fall gashikus, which were always really highly anticipated. And it was similar to what you were describing. You know, you'd go away and all together, and you live together, and you would eat together, and you're sleeping indoors, and you're practicing all the time. And maybe some alumni come back, and to like really sort of fire up the intensity of practice. And yeah, it was just a really fun time that everybody looked forward to, and you just got to really indulge in Aikido and practicing with each other. So I think
There are, yeah, the challenges, I think, at a university dojo, depending on your space and your mats. And one of the things that we've often struggled with, you get certain times, or you're not given good times, is that basically, as a feeder dojo, always, I mean, I've done 35 years of teaching beginner classes, and for a long time, this was an intake of 20 to 40 people and so at times it was difficult to give enough attention to the more senior students for them to be able to progress if they're constantly, because they were expected to be for the first few weeks. Well, we did establish an idea that as they all come, everybody does the warm up together. Everybody spends the first half of the class, and the other half we would split the class so that senior students and a senior student would lead whatever, and they would go off and they could practice. But it's always a struggle. Sometimes we just had an extra half hour tacked on for intensive practice, for testing purposes and for practice. As again, you always know, as a university, you have people for 1 year. You might have them for 4 years, which is wonderful. Or else I had some years everybody came and they were all in first year. Other years you'd get wonderful committed students and they were in fourth year. And they would go off. But sometimes that meant they had a new opportunity when they finished here. A number of them, we do encourage students at the university to practice at Victoria Aikikai, and I still train there on weekends. And a number of them do add an extra practice on Saturday and Sunday. On Sunday in Victoria, we have an open practice open to all the dojos. And so there's always a yudansha on the mats, but you're just encouraged to take a buddy and go and train in what you would like to do, and there's someone there to help you. So it was a way to expand your experience outside of just doing basic forms, because that's one of the difficulties.
Yeah, and I like the idea too of taking a buddy with you, right? Trying to get one of your friends to come with you as well, because again, if you're starting with a bit of a social connection, then that's a good starting point.
We've found that the people who've come in twos or threes, they tend to stick longer. Not everybody, but it does really help. We have on some years, and again, it's funny, we had the early 90s, probably our heyday was mid 90s to mid 2000s, when we would always still at the end of a term have over 20 students. And then, but we've always registered, maybe we're lucky now, we don't have the numbers and we don't have the same number of beginners coming in, but you'll have a dozen people who are all ranked students who've been there and who, some of them are now graduates and stuff. The recruitment, there's been a huge change over the last 10 years, particularly the last 5 years. But 10 years ago was when they changed us, when we lost our status as a club within the university. We are still a club, but we are now just part of the course. And part of that was so that some other martial arts, which are their only venue in town, were always restricted, because as a club at the university, you'd start the third week of term, you'd have to finish by the beginning of exam period, and they wanted more of a continuum. And so they want to have classes going throughout the year, which isn't the protocol for clubs. And so we weren't given a choice for that, but we are. And also, if we did remain a club, then we also then lost our priority for getting times.
Right.
So there were ways that if you wanted to have a time and have a course, then you couldn't be a club. They have maintained a few of the things we did. We were still allowed to go and when it's available, use the university property for our retreats. They do allow us to have a seminar once a term, which normally, if we were just outside, would be a considerable cost, which they do provide us without a cost. So there's things there, but what we lost at first, the hardest thing is, and it's not necessarily the fault of the club, it could possibly be me as well, that in order to get the people to be a club and to take the ownership that we had before, because we had a president, you had duties, you had that buy-in to the club. You have to do that, and at times, and I think part of the issue right now is that I'm probably a little tired. There's certain things you do. There were some terms we had a really active group, and they were really excited about extra practice. So I just found times, and so we were training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but they wanted, so we did Tuesday and Thursday mornings as well, and we did 2 retreats each term. Every year it always depended on the group that you get in there. But as I've gotten older, also some of my students who have stayed within the club, as opposed to just joining the club downtown, we're all older too. So there's different commitments, and they had jobs, they had families, they have all of those kinds of things. So that's one of the biggest thing is getting people to start, because beforehand, I don't think there were as many options or as many things on people's schedules. I mean, Aikido takes time and commitment, and people want something they can just do and leave it. And you have to have a mental mindset to be committed to come to something like Aikido. And it is different, even from the time when we had an email list, because everybody, to get hold of people, well, people didn't necessarily have smartphones, and even that change has changed the dynamic of what people are doing, because they're in a different mindset. It's much more scattered, and I think their whole lives are more scattered than they were.
Do you think there's some way that you mentioned that Aikido requires a certain mindset? Is there ways that we can encourage the development of that mindset?
Sometimes, if you can, again, if you get the right person leading a class, and all of a sudden you just get a connection, then people do that. They come and they get involved. We do actually now. I haven't done it for some years. Again, it's partly me going back, and we used to spend time talking about Aikido and the history. And we have most terms we have recently, but we also invite people to come and teach the class, and people from not only our own martial art, but I have students who have gone to to jujitsu and other stuff. And so they've come in and taught classes. I have students who are now in other styles of Aikido who've come, and one of Maggie Kay went with Chiba Sensei after spending 5 years with us, and then came back, and she has her own dojo. And so she came, and so we put on a course for 8 weeks of just doing basic of Aikido. And so that's one of the things that was actually quite popular. And then we did we had another student showed up from another country, and he was very good with weapons. So we started a morning class for that term, and he taught weapons on Friday mornings before work. Those opportunities have helped. We've had summer opportunities where they put on, as somebody mentioned at the meeting last week, they come from other countries or other things for the summer programs, and we've put on several of those. And just 2 years ago, we ended up with 5 students from 5 different countries, all who had practiced Aikido in some form, and came, and we spent May and June together training. Now, they came and they went, but it really added a lot to the energy of the practice, and we have kept in touch. So there's many ways to look at success of what you've got. We don't always look at just who your numbers are on the mats. We've had people who've come and have been inspired to start and to go somewhere else. But it's difficult when you do that, and then you go to class, and sometimes there's 2 people, 5 people. When it can be soul destroying when you put all that effort yourself into doing it. And to maintain that energy, and particularly if you don't have a pile of other people who could teach it for you, if it's me, myself, and I, then it's all on you to do it. So it's hard to
like, how do you measure success? Well, I think, those students who continue, who go on, who leave your club, that go on and seek out Aikido somewhere else, or, find some way of incorporating it in their life, or even using it as sort of like a springboard into another martial art or something else. I mean, that's important too. That should also be a measure of success, I think. Just, kind of inspiring those people to stick with it.
It's important not to have a sense of ownership of your students. They're there just like as your children. They're a gift, and they're there with you for a while. But and sometimes it can be difficult because some people get somewhat possessive, perhaps, of students, and not encouraging them. Sometimes I had a student, and he was very keen, and then we do seminars, and I do encourage my students. We take them once they're past being beginners. We have around us. I was just thinking, when we had we had the fall seminar with Osawa Sensei, and we send out things. We have a relationship with the Kenkyukai people under Takeda Sensei. We had people from Ueshiba Aikido, Birinkai, Kokikai. And so they're all around us now too, and they all came. And so I do go to their seminars sometimes, and they come to mine. And I'm with Kenkyukai. The last time I was there, I'm usually invited to teach a class. And so we bring different things. I learn from their style of practice. It's not something I could do all the time, but it's something for me to sort of approach it with the beginner's mind again. And it's challenging, but it's really good to get out of my sense of well, you just do it this way. Well, you don't. And we're always learning something new. So I will go there, and then they will come and they will train with us. And so I think that's an important thing. So even sometimes, and we share our mats around for seminars. So those kinds of things, I think, really help to foster that sense of where you're going. I mean, as I say, it's not just how many people you can get into your doors. And sometimes, even if you say, I have a dozen people, and they're a really strong core group, that's a great gift to have. Not just saying that I can put 20 people on the mats. Sometimes different classes suit different people, and different approaches to teaching. As you say, we don't all learn the same way. And one of my when I was training with Jason Verbitsky, I mean, that was something that really appealed to him. And so he would often look, and he'd say, well, this person always needs to stand on the left because they only see the movement from this way. And this person needs, what you need, different people would need. Some people, the visual clues were there. Some other people, it was sounds and different things, but you had to look for the hook that both
Right.
allowed them to progress, but also that was what was it that drew them back to the class. It's different, as you say, it's as different as the number of people who come in the door.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, having teachers who recognize that people learn in different ways and adapt their teaching to who is in class and, what they need in order to progress. That's really great. That's, yeah, I think that's how, you can really connect, make a connection between student and teacher. Have there been times where you've been really sort of disappointed that someone didn't continue with Aikido, or how do you deal with that? Because I know, you know, Aikido has a very high dropout rate, and I imagine that can get a little bit wearisome for instructors.
It can be. I mean, particularly since you have to separate your own sense of ego from what something is, because all of this, even if somebody comes to 4, 6, 10 classes, I mean, even if they come to a class and they decide, well, this isn't something that suits me, but that doesn't mean that the 10 classes they took were a waste of time, because they've learned something from that. But it is hard, yes. I mean, you can go and sometimes you have this great plan. I mean, it's like everything. You have a great plan for classes and you're going to do this and you have a progression and and then you get to class and you get 10 minutes in and it's not working. So you have to start again. But that's, again, if you talk about Aikido and Aikido on and off the mat, something we do talk about a lot in our classes. And sometimes it's more for students. I have a student and she hasn't been on the mats for years, but she still calls me, and so we still have a relationship, but her Aikido was part of her growing up and becoming, now she's a parent and has kids, and the connection is different, but she hasn't lost that sense of Aikido. The Aikido off the mats and being able to, we talk about this at exam time, because that was one of the things when we aren't allowed to use the gym because they have exams.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually weapons time. So we take, and I said, it's very therapeutic to go and take a stick and just swing a stick, when you're in the middle of exams. And so they use different things. And we talk about things when you're trying to study something and you hit a brick wall. Well, in Aikido, you learn all about pivoting and about doing a tenkan around your problems, or you can't have a preconceived idea, that you always have to go with the flow. And that all of those concepts of how you deal with daily life, that, if you just hit your head against one spot trying to go through it, you have to find the way to find the opening. Looking for openings, whether it's on or off the mats, I think is a huge lesson.